Hello, everybody. I hope you guys can hear me. Hello. Welcome back. So good to see so many people coming in. Hi. Okay, let me invite Shayan to the stage, and then we can hear all about his Vietnam trip. Hello. Hi, guys. So, yep, just waiting for a few more people coming in. Awesome. Nice. Cool. So, guys, welcome back.
Hello.
Hey.
Hello. Can you guys hear me?
Hello. Yes, I can hear you. Fancy new headphones.
Yeah, I was in Vietnam and I'm in Taiwan just now, so I'm traveling a little lighter. So these are my makeshift microphones. I'm singing out for the first time. It's kind of like weird around here, but
It is
oh
strange. Life's
well.
always a bit strange in terms of backgrounds, but you're looking great. Amazing. So, welcome back, everyone. So, this is our very last session. This is so sad, but like I just tweeted, this is not the end. This is only the beginning of your Sui journey.
Indeed,
And
indeed.
amazing. As usual, I've just dropped the link into the GitHub resource material area. So that's in the chat. Make sure to give Shayan some love on Twitter, as well as the Sui Foundation. Those are also both in the chat. And yeah, this is today's topic, as you can see on screen. I will stop talking now. I'm just very excited. Shayan, take it away.
Yeah, so again, everyone, thank you so much for coming to the final session. Wow, it's like the last already. Tear. But yeah, anyways, yeah, as Angela was saying, yeah, like it was us at the Sweet Foundation had a pretty fun time recently. So like yeah, we were just in Vietnam for our Sweet builder house there, and now I'm in Taiwan right now for another project that we're working on. And yeah, right now it's 1:30 a.m. So if you ever thought I wasn't like giving my all to Sui, I hope you guys can. No, yeah, it is. Yeah, Taiwan right now it's 1:30 a.m. So yeah, but yeah, I'm more than happy to be here. And yeah, let's make this last session a blast. So yeah, so last week, or technically last week, the last session at least, we created our first game, right? So now we created some code, but now it's actually important to one, test it, to publish it, and then so we'll be able to call it, right? So if you want to actually build a game, you can't just have code, right? You want to be able to like first make sure that it works, and then you want to be able to publish it such that you can actually integrate it within your dApps. So before we talk about testing the actual hero package that we made last week, let's talk about like testing more broadly. So, again, you know the drill. In a new terminal, enter Sui Move new testing to create a package called testing. And in the sources directory, create a new file called car underscore testing and populate it with the fields you see below. So you'll see that we have two objects here, a car with key and store, and its only field is, besides ID, is its name, which is a string, and then car factory, which has key store. And as you might be able to tell, it keeps a counter, an increment of how many cars were created. So let's talk about these functions now. So the init function initializes the car factory as a shared object, and it keeps track of all the cars created. So we're going to first initialize it as 0. And then yeah, these two functions you'll see are pretty straightforward. It's something that we haven't seen before, but for the create function, as you'll see, it is essentially initializes a new car, initializes a new car, and with the name that you pass in through the function, and it transfers it to the person calling the function, and it then increments the cars created by 1. And then simple enough, the transfer car function does exactly what it says it'll do. It transfers that car object to a different address. So let's take a look at how we can test this code. But first, let's talk about how testing works in Sui. So a move call in Sui is encapsulated in a Sui transaction, and a developer may wish to test interactions between different transactions within a single test. So for example, one transaction could create an object, another transaction could transfer it, another one could destroy it, mutate it, whatever, right? So Sui specific testing is supported by the test scenario module that provides Sui related testing functionality that's otherwise unavailable in pure Move and its testing framework. The main concept in the test scenario module is a scenario that emulates a series of Sui transactions, each executed by potentially a different user. So at a high level, a developer writing tests can start the first transaction using the test scenario double colon begin function that takes an address of the user executing this transaction as the first and only argument and returns an instance of the scenario struct, which represents the scenario of the transaction. So as you can see over here, we have initialized three like dummy addresses, right? Admin, initial owner, and final owner. So as you might be able to tell from the names, the admin is the one that actually initializes this module. Initial owner will be the initial owner of the car, and final owner will be the final owner of the car. So transaction one, let's first initialize the test scenario. So anytime we want to call the mutable reference to the transaction context and mute transaction context, we have to replace it with test scenario double colon context scenario as we're creating that mock transaction context. So as you can see, all we do here is call that init function that we created earlier. And then like I said earlier, because we don't have the real transaction context, we're passing in this mocked one. So for transaction two, as you can see, it says initial owner creates car. So let's talk about what that means. So first, as you may remember from the actual function, we need to have the car factory object enabled in order to be able to create a car. So first we need to actually call take shared as we need to pull in this car factory object from our mock global storage. So starting, we'll just make a simple assertion, right? We're going to assert that cars created, cars factory dot cars created is zero, right? Because we haven't created any cars yet, so it should be zero. Then we're going to call create car with the given parameters, pass in the mutable reference to the car factory because we're incrementing its cars created by one, the name of our car, Sui Mobile, and then the transaction context, which again, in this case, we have to replace it with test scenario uh, double colon context. So once we create car, we can then make the assertion that the car factory dot cars created should be one. And then we have to, last but not least, call test scenario double colon return shared. So before we get to the last line, does this make sense? We create a car. So first we say there's no cars created. We create a car, assert that one car was created. Right? Simple enough. So this test passes. If this test were to not pass, so for example, let's say we did this code, like we wrote this exactly, but the test failed. That would mean that we would have an error on our end. So right now, this test serves as a way to kind of double check our logic to make sure that, okay, yeah, we've created zero cars first, we've created a car, and now there's one car. So now let's talk about the last line again, where we call return shared. Why do we have to call return shared, and what happens if we don't call it? So as you can see, we need to call return shared because we're not actually using this car factory in our function. We're not consuming this variable by the end of the function, and because it does not have drop, we get this error. So if we read this error, it says exactly what it says, right? So line 13, struct car factory as key store. In blue, it says, to satisfy the constraint, the drop ability would need to be added here, which it shouldn't have, right? And then line 63, that note says, the type testing equals OX0 car testing car factory does not have the ability to drop. The local value variable car factory still contains a value, right? So it still contains a value. We didn't do anything with it. The value does not have the drop ability and must be consumed before the function returns. So again, to go back to the previous function, so now that we did everything that we needed to with car factory, we need to return it back to global storage. Essentially just say, okay, compiler, stop yelling at us. You can have it back. Shoo. So let's talk about the third transaction. Initial owner transfers car to final owner. So, oh yes, one thing to keep in mind too is that you'll see that in every single test scenario, when we call next transaction, we're actually passing in the second argument is the owner, sorry, is the address that is actually calling the function, right? So, because initial owner has the car, initial owner has to be the one that actually calls this function. So similarly, we just say let car equals to test scenario take from sender car. So again, similarly, right now, initial owner has this car object somewhere in our mock global storage, which is why we need to call take from sender. And then simple enough, we call transfer car, we pass in the car object, and then final owner. And then you'll see here that we don't need to again call return to sender. Why? Because the car no longer exists, right? We actually use this object within this mock transaction. Therefore, we don't need to call test scenario double colon return to sender. And then the last transaction, we'll check to see if final owner actually got the car by deleting it. So again, in this function, you'll see that it's now being called by final owner. So similarly, let car equals test scenario take from sender car. First, we destructure car, and then we finally delete its object ID. And then because this function passes, you're able to say that, okay, this function passes, therefore final owner must have had this car. Because if final owner never had this car, it would toss an error, right? You can't delete something that you don't have. The Sui compiler would have tossed an error. And then finally, we'll just call test scenario double colon end. And that ends this mock test. So now that we know how testing works, let's get back to our hero. Back to our hero. So these are some few testing functions, meaning that these are just some functions that make our lives easier when doing these tests. So as you can see that the two test functions below are tagged with test only, meaning that these functions can only be called in a test scenario, and that they otherwise don't really fulfill any other purpose. So let's talk about the first one, assert hero strength. Essentially, we just pass in the hero and then what we would think the strength is and set them equal to each other and hope that they're equal. If not, it tosses an error. So the first test only function now, delete hero for testing, aptly named. It takes hero and destructures it and then deletes the object ID. And then same thing with sword, destructures it and then deletes its object ID. And then delete game admin for testing, same thing, destructures its fields, and then deletes its ID. So now let's talk about the main test in our function from last week. Oh yeah, so if you haven't already, please go back to the other directory, the other folder where you wrote this code, where this test code is also going to be in it. Or if you're copying the Mistin, if you're following on the Mistin one, then it's going to be there. But if not, you can like write this yourself as we go along. And as always, all the materials in the GitHub repository as well. So yeah, with that said, let's take a look at sleigh board test. So as you can see here, we have two characters now, admin and player. So let's talk about the first transaction now, simple enough. Run the module initializer. So as you can see, the init function is being called by the admin because on line 2 of this function here, test scenario next transaction is being called by the admin. The next transaction, player purchases a hero with the coins. So as you can see, the player is now calling this function. So as you may imagine, or sorry, as you may remember from the previous lesson, in order to create a new bore, you actually need the game info. So we say let game equals take immutable because it was a immutable object, a frozen object, game info. Then we just simply say game ref. We're taking a reference to it, right? We call coin mint for testing, just to mint some coins, some Sui to our address. We call the acquire hero function, and then at the end of this, we call return immutable, right? Because we had to take the game info struct, now we have to return it because we didn't do anything with it, we didn't consume it, so we have to return it back to our mock global storage. So now the admin sends a bore to the player. So again, as you can see, the admin has to call this function. So same thing, the admin has to take the immutable reference to the game info. And then the admin cap, the admin has to, from global storage, take that game admin object because only the admin, if you remember, only the admin of our game has the ability to create new bores. Thus, the game admin still has to take this game admin object from our mock global storage. And then our game admin calls send bore, and it passes in the parameters that are necessary, the game reference, mutable reference to the admin cap, 10 and 10 for the bore strength and bore HP, the address of the player, and then the mutable reference to the transaction context. But again, in this case, it's being called via test scenario context. And then once we do that, yeah, we have to call return to sender and return immutable again because we did not consume the admin cap or the game info. So we have to shove them back into our mock global storage just so our compiler doesn't throw an error saying, oh ho ho, you didn't use it. What's going on? It doesn't have drop. You can't do this. So we say, okay, take it. And then, yeah, one of the most important parts of the function is actually being able to slay the bore, right? So now as you can see, this function is being called by the player, and that's evident from test scenario next transaction scenario comma player. And then same thing, we need to take in the following objects that we need from global storage. So we call take immutable game info, take from sender hero, and take from sender bore, because the player is calling this now, right? And the hero and bore objects are within the player's address, and the game info is still in that global storage as an immutable object. And then same thing, the player calls slay, tosses in or passes in all the respective variables, and then finally returns to sender and returns immutable the hero object and the game object. And then as you might see, or as you can see, we don't need to return to sender the bore anymore as it's now destroyed. So it's no longer lingering at the end of the scope. So for example, if we were to not write, so if we were to omit the return to sender line, it would throw an error because the hero still exists. The compiler would say, hey, what's going on? You borrowed the hero, but it's still here. But as you can see, we don't need to call return to sender for bore because the compiler knows that, oh yeah, the bore really isn't here. We called slay, which if you remember from last week, it actually deletes the object ID for the bore. And then of course, then we end it. Once it's all said and done, we end it. So now again, let's quickly go over how we can publish our module. Simple enough, just go back to the directory of our game, enter Sui client publish dash dash gas dash budget 20,000, and voila, our module is published. And again, I'm just passing in 20,000 as like an arbitrarily big number, just so we don't get like an error or whatever. And you have to also keep in mind that you do need some Sui in your wallet in order to call this function or to publish this module. So once we do all that's left now is to actually play the game. And again, we're not going to be actually playing this game from a pretty fancy front end. We'll be going over like the smart contract logic, right? So if you were to actually integrate this to a front end, this is how it would look like underneath the hood, the modules. So the way we'll be doing this is we'll be calling these functions from the Sui Explorer, similar to we did in, I believe it was session 4, 3 or 4. Yes, it was session 3 because that's where we like created our first NFT. So if you think back to session 3 where we created our first NFT, this is how we did it. So we'll be doing the same thing again because I think it's just an easier way to visualize what's going on than to call everything from the CLI or to create like a very own dedicated front end for this, which honestly could be your task now. So as you may remember, the first step into playing this game is to call acquire hero. So acquire hero takes 2 arguments. It takes the game info object and some Sui tokens. So argument 0 is the game info object, and argument 1 is our Sui coin. How can we verify this? So again, my values are different. I've already published this, and I think DevNet has since been wiped. So copying these values, you'll probably get nothing, but this is what it looks like. So as you see on the left, the game info object ends in F4C, and then just an arbitrary coin object that ends in CA71. We pass in these 2 objects, and when we call execute, it passes. We acquire a hero. And again, it takes in the immutable game info object and some Sui tokens. And then one thing that's interesting to keep in mind is that due to Sui's object-centric approach, when interacting with a contract, you know exactly what objects you'll be interacting with and how. So for example, let's take a look at the left screenshot right now. When it says under the tab where it says permissions requested for transfer, we're going to be transferring coin, right? That makes sense. And then it says what function requires it and then what module. So, right, that's everything that makes sense what's that we have like established up until now, right? Because we need to give some Sui coins. We need to be able to like pass in some tokens as the argument, as a parameter in order to receive a new hero. So we're transferring it, right? But then on the right tab, you'll see under read, it says game info, where it simply says that we're going to be just reading the game info, right? Because for these functions, we essentially need the game info to make sure that the boars and swords and heroes all belong to a certain game. Because this is decentralized, because this is permissionless, anybody can create a new game. So it's important that the objects belonging to our game and our game only match the actual game info. And again, it just says we're reading game info. And the best thing about this is, again, due to Sui's object-centric approach, you can take these otherwise abstract concepts and present them in a human readable format, right? We're transferring coins, we're just reading our game info, that's it. So, as you may remember, the game admin object also has the boars created, game ID, and potions created fields. So calling send boar needs to have the game admin object, and that means that only admins can create it. It's essentially an admin capability, right? So only admins can create boars, whereas anybody can create a new hero. So if we want to call send boar now, again, which is the admin only function, first argument, argument 0, is the game info object. Argument 1 is the game admin object, ensuring that only the admin can call this function. Arguments 2 and 3 are the boar HP and boar strength, respectively. And argument 4 is the user address to share this boar to. And in our case, it's ourself. So again, as you might be thinking, why do we need to modify the game admin cap when we only need it to create a new boar? Because up until now, every time that I've used an admin cap in an example, it's pretty much just been that read-only reference, right? It was just an underscore, colon, and admin cap. We just need that reference, that read-only reference to it, just to pretty much say, okay, I'm the admin, I have this in my possession, and if I don't have this, then I can't call this function. But in this case, our that object is doing the job of two things now, right? So it's taking the place of the admin capability, or it is an admin capability still, and it is keeping that track. It's keeping a ledger of boars created and potions created. So that's why we're modifying it. So again, if you look at the left screenshot, permissions requested, we're modifying game admin now because we're incrementing boards created by one. And then when we do call it, you'll see exactly that. Boards created is now one. So now let's call the slay function. So to do so, we need to pass in our hero. And here I've put the red box over our hero's object. And then you'll see the two other red boxes below. I've highlighted that our hero currently has 0 experience because we haven't slayed any boars yet, and that its sword magic and strength is 10 and 1 respectively. So now to call the slay function, we need the game info object, the hero object, and the boar object. And then once we call this and are able to once we're able to successfully call this function, we execute it, you see that we have two updated objects. So the top object is our Sui balance, so what we paid for gas, and the bottom object is our hero object. So again, why was our hero updated? Because as we saw, our hero now has one experience. So the one on the left, the screenshot on the left was taken before calling slay, and the screenshot on the right was taken after calling slay. So as you can see, our boar now has one experience, and the strength of our sword is now increased by one. So yeah, the strength was one before, and it's two now. So now let's do a stronger boar. What'll happen? Right, so if we, again, on the left is now the boar ID, and I'm skipping the few screenshots. If we call slay, pass in this boar object, you'll see that our hero now has 21 XP in a sword strength of 3. Right, so the experience was just the HP that was incremented onto the hero, and the sword strength was just the boar's strength, which was added to it. And then similarly, we'll just do something again, right, where we want to call a similar function, but now the boar is a lot beefier. So the boar now has 40 HP and 2 strength. And then again, when we call slay, it takes its respective values and increments it by the heroes. So one thing to keep in mind that this was for a wrapped object, right? Because in our case, in our scenario, the sword was wrapped inside hero via option, right? But utilizing dynamic fields, we could do so much more. So for example, take for instance, maybe like a shield. So right now, we don't have a shield under our hero, but if later down the line, or maybe you yourself, you want to be able to update this, you can actually add a shield dynamic field, that rhymes, and you'll be able to then play with it similar to this. So again, I'm just thinking right now, it's 2 a.m. here, getting kind of hazy. Let's say our shield can take damage, or we can enchant it, and you would also be able to do the same thing, where you would be able to actually show the shield getting damaged after a fight. You'd be able to apply a certain, I don't know, spell to the shield, and via these dynamic objects, you'd be able to see this in real time as well. So really, with the whole introduction of dynamic fields, the possibility with respect to how you can program games really is endless. And then before we end, what happens if we look up that same boar ID? So if we go back, so this one, you can see it ends in EA42. Yeah, so as you can see on the left, this boar object also ends in EA42. But after we call slay, and you copy and paste that same boar ID into the Sui Explorer, you get this error. Data cannot be extracted on the following object ID OX dot 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 EA42. Why? as you remember, when we call slay, we literally delete the object ID. It no longer exists. So if you were to enter that in the Sui Explorer again, you would get an error saying that, yeah, this bore ID no longer exists. This bore period no longer exists. So use, yeah, it's important to use the object delete function seriously, as if you are not serious with it, you might be have there might be some unintended consequences to whatever you're trying to program. And that is it. The bibliography slash further reading for this also includes the first hero game that I went over in the last lesson, more docs on how to actually build and test your code, and then another link really showing how what the test scenario module looks like. So when it comes to testing your own code, you know what you can call and how it works. And then my favorite part, before we end this presentation, I'd like to quickly share what we have in store for the next few weeks. So the Sui Hong Kong Builder House is coming up next month. If you are based in Hong Kong or the APAC region, I think this would be an awesome opportunity. We are doing a demo day. So if you are building something awesome, or maybe you're not building something awesome yet, but you want to, and you think you can attend, definitely please use this link to sign up. As always, spots are limited. So please, if you do sign up, if you do want to come, sign up now. And then again, as always, survey and questions. These surveys really help us know what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong, helps us helps guide us to the right direction. So in the future, we can create content that really suits your needs. So yeah, as Angela said, this is like the last Sui slash Uncode Club presentation, but that doesn't mean that like all Sui content is coming to a halt, right? Or coming to a halt. I will personally still be making more Sui content. The Sui Foundation in general is going to be making more Sui content. And I believe there's a hackathon coming up. Who knows? No, I think that's announced. So yeah. Yeah, this is also just going to help us, like I just said, know what we're doing right, know what we're doing wrong, so we can help create content that helps you guys. And that's it. Thank you again to everybody that came to these 6 sessions. Like I said earlier, I feel like I just batted an eye. And it's over. But thank you so much again for attending, everybody. And yeah, I can open the floor for some questions now.
I think we've got a few questions in the question tab.
So I'll go from the bottom now. So
Sure.
Jelly asked, is there a limit to the amount of items in the mock global storage? Oof, I'm not sure. I want to say there probably is. There usually is some sort of limit to everything you do on a blockchain. Nothing really is infinite, but I don't know what that limit is off the top of my head. The second question Joey asked was, why is the bore info take from sender? So let's go to that. Right. So if you remember, when the admin calls, so like over here, right? Admin calls send bore. The admin sends the bore to the player address. So that's the one, two, three, four, fifth. So if you look at the fifth argument in send bore, it is player, which is the player address. So in the next slide, when the player calls take from sender, it's because the actual player address has the bore. So you're taking that bore from the sender address. Yeah, so can you please go over the slave function again, especially the while loop condition? What happens if hero strength is greater than bore HP? So yeah, when hero strength, yeah, so essentially how that code worked was the two, it essentially like mocks the battle between the hero and the boar. So when the hero strength is greater than the boar HP, the hero essentially slays the boar and takes its experience and like adds it to itself. Okay, then Aid also asked, how do we get what address the package is published at? So yeah, all that juicy information should be here. So if I read this right now, yeah, like with anything, it says the address the package is published at. So yeah, if you've taken this transaction hash or really anything, yeah, because if you copy anything, you should be able to get the information from like the Sui Explorer. So for example, if we just like toss in the sender, if we just search the sender, so it's OX18 dot dot AE51 into the Sui Explorer, we'll be able to see that, yeah, this is the address of the package. Lastly, what is the difference between the Sui CLI command, pay Sui, and transfer Sui? That, to be honest, I'm not sure between that because I know some things might be being deprecated. So I think, yeah, I need to look into that myself some more. Yeah, I need to look into that. I need to look into that myself some more. But I don't think you need to worry about it because you'll very rarely be calling those functions from the CLI. Tufan asked, are we able to update packages? I know that's something that the Miston Labs team is currently working on right now, but I believe we're still not able to update packages. And then Shanna asked, what is the difference between test and test only? So, uh-huh. So test only says that this is a function that we're only going to use in tests, whereas test is just this function is a test. So let me explain that better. So test only pretty much says, okay, we're creating this new function and we're only going to be able to use this function inside a test. So anytime you see a function that is annotated with test, it can take in the test only functions and that this function itself isn't going to be like part of the bytecode when it's published. And then yes, if you can't update a package, it means that you need to redeploy it.
Awesome. I think that was all of the questions. And I don't see any more coming through. So thank you so much, Shayan, especially for taking this session at 2 a.m., almost
Yep.
3, very early in the morning. Thank you so much for being here with us today and throughout this entire series. It's been really, really amazing. And you have been a wonderful speaker. To everyone else, thank you so much for coming to our Educate series. Yes, Tufan. So would it be possible to have more sessions in the future? Please stay tuned to hear more about the Encode and Sui Foundation partnerships coming up, because there will be more events. So please do follow us, follow Sui Foundation, follow Shayan on Twitter to get the most recent updates. Other than that, thank you again, everyone. It's been really awesome, and I hope you guys have a fantastic time building on Sui.
Yeah, just echo what Angela said. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. This isn't a goodbye. Rather, this is a, I don't even know where I'm going with this. Thank you, everyone.
It's a let's go into the next step of our journey. But I know it's early
There we
morning for
go.
you, so we'll let you get some rest now. But thank you again, everyone, and we shall end it there.